In an astounding move, the United Nations Commissioner for Human Rights moved the Supreme Court of India over the Citizenship Amendment Act. The UNHRC wants to be made a party into the existing pleas that have been filed against this law that has been passed by the Parliament of our country. And there are a bunch of these petitions, as you know, in Supreme Court. But the fact that United Nations now wants to interfere, well, that's unprecedented. India has been quick to react. India has in fact hit back, saying that Citizenship Amendment Act is an internal matter and it is the sovereign right of the Indian Parliament to make laws. No foreign party has any locus standi. Issues pertaining to India's sovereignty are our own, are internal, and it is clear that CAA is constitutionally valid. That's been the response from Ministry of External Affairs after United Nations moved the Supreme Court. The opposition has been quick to lap up this move. Adhir Ranjan Chaudhary of the Congress Party said, well, it's embarrassing for us. It's no more an internal matter now. But is United Nations right to interfere in India's internal matter? Is Citizenship Amendment Act really something where the UN should intervene and go to our courts? That's the big question. Harish Salve, top legal mind of our country, joins us this evening. Thank you, Mr. Salve. For me, this is really unprecedented. Can you remember any other time where United Nations has actually gone to the Supreme Court over a policy which is completely internal?
Not that my limited research has revealed any such thing. In fact, the US Supreme Court over the decades has invited what are called amicus briefs from interesting groups. And they have decided so many important cases of human rights, including segregation, racial rights, minority rights, and so on. I wonder how many times the UN rights body has considered it appropriate to try and dive in and advance their point of view. But I find this surprising on another level. The United Nations operates beyond municipal law. It operates at the level of countries. It operates where domestic law is not a defense for international treaty obligations. So if India violates the ICCPR, it's a matter of public international law to judge India's actions, and domestic law itself is never a defense. So for the UN's body to get involved in domestic law, its validity, its operation is very odd. I would not say it's unusual, it's odd. And the third is, we must always remember, we have not signed the optional protocol for dispute resolution because we maintain that while we have a commitment to civil and political rights, we are a sovereign country and we will decide our own issues. Our domestic law has sufficient remedies for remedying breach of human rights. Our Supreme Court has repeatedly relied on the ICCPR to construe the Indian Constitution and the rule of law. And therefore, for India, resolving constitutional issues, resolving human rights issues is purely a matter of domestic law. We have not agreed to the optional protocol by which the committee of the UNHCR would have had jurisdiction over India. Keeping all this in mind, I am more than surprised that this has happened. I would also say one thing: one may have strong views about the CAA, for or against it, but I think on one aspect, we all are united. Whatever may be India's problems, our sovereignty is not negotiable. And if we do not accept international monitoring of what goes on, then we cannot accept this kind of intervention. If we allow and encourage this kind of intervention, today it is on CAA, tomorrow it will be on reservations, day after it will be on communal riots, and the day after it will be on drought and the measures taken by India. And are we going to allow foreign bodies to have a serious say in Indian courts and guide Indian policy? So I think we have to step back, and while the battle on the CAA has well been joined by those who are its protagonists and those who are its antagonists. I don't think this kind of compromise of Indian sovereignty should be encouraged.
Yes, and on the other aspect, and you and I have had conversations about Citizenship Amendment Act, and we may not agree on all aspects of it, but I find it a little odd for the reason it seems as if the UNHRC hasn't understood the law properly, hasn't understood the issue properly. How can this be a human rights issue? We're not throwing anybody out of our country. We are simply saying that for few of them, the timeline would perhaps be different. Preference will be given. How is this a human rights issue to begin with?
Let me tell you where this is all heading up. India has refused to sign the Refugee Convention. Okay? The UN has tried through various agencies to put pressure on India to sign the Refugee Convention. We have steadfastly refused. This is the first step. Everybody has their own agenda. It's all very well for people to jump up with glee and say, oh, how good the UNHRC has jumped in and try and score brownie points over their fight with the government. But please remember, the UN has its own agenda. Are we trying to be pushed into a corner into finally accepting the Refugee Convention? Is that what we are going for? Because one of the criticisms of this law has been that why only from these three countries? Why not from other countries? Why not Rohingyas? Why not other Muslims prosecuted by their minorities, etc.? We are getting back into the area of the Refugees Convention.
So, Mr. Salve, you believe that this is perhaps another way of forcing the government to perhaps agree to a larger international policy?
In fact, my answer to the criticism that why is this limited only to three countries was based on the argument that asylum, who should be allowed naturalization, is a matter of a country's internal policy. And if you allow it to people coming from other countries, and it's a matter of your internal policy. So this is the basic issue. It's all very well. Our Supreme Court will hear whether limiting it to people from minorities for three countries is good enough, and you should not throw it open to anybody who's a minority in his country. Our Supreme Court will hear and decide what our Constitution provides. But there is a larger agenda. I feel there is a larger agenda. And the larger agenda is to get India to open up on its refugee policy. There have been people who've been pressing for the refugee policy. There was a petition filed in the Supreme Court that India should accept Rohingyas, and the Supreme Court said nothing of the sort. It's for the government to decide.
Right. All right. So then my last question to you is this. Have we actually seen in recent times the UNHRC ask other countries and other governments to behave in a similar fashion?
Well, we haven't seen, but I hope if this is the new policy of the UNHRC, they will file interventions in the US Supreme Court also.
Yes.
And the US Supreme Court is deciding human rights issues.
Yes, Harish Salve, thank you so much for joining us this evening and taking the time out to help us understand what exactly is going on here. Thank you so much.